All right, so here in lesson 13, we're going to talk about classes. And the best way for me to describe an example of what classes are in C# is in its simplest form, classes are basically objects, they're things. And so if you think of an example in the real world, you have a car. And cars have different properties or things on them that make them a car. So all cars have a horn, they have wheels, they have headlights, they have an engine, and they have a transmission, among other fundamental things or properties about the car that make it a car. Now, there might be lots of different types of cars or different properties that are different between different instances of cars, such as the color of the car, maybe the number of the doors, the number of wheels, the size of the wheels, etc. But fundamentally, all cars have the same type of fundamental properties, just maybe different values for each of those properties. So like bigger wheels, bigger engine, a louder horn, etc., etc. Now, one other thing to fundamentally understand is that we may make a description of a car. So with classes in C#, we are going to sort of create the description about what makes a car and all of the properties about that car. And then we're going to use that kind of as a recipe for fundamentally creating multiple instances of cars throughout our code. So as we fundamentally start with the base class and a description of a car itself, we may make a new car, which we see here that there are 4 different cars on the screen. One of those instances of the cars is red, one of the instances of the cars is blue, and the other is white and gray. So there are 4 separate cars, but they are all fundamentally inheriting or originating from a core description about a car. So just if you need to, come back to this early explanation when I actually show the code here. We're going to make a C# class of a car object, and we're going to then make instances of those and change those properties here in the code. But if you need to, come back to the introduction of this video and just fundamentally think about classes as objects, and then you can make instances of those objects throughout your code. In construction speak and in Constructor speak, just think that you have fundamentally a beam in the model, and all beams have like a start and an end point. They have a profile, a material grade. You can set a class and a color, and essentially you're going to have multiple instances of beams in the model with different profile sizes, different material grades, different lengths, etc. So that's essentially how classes are going to work. We're just going to classes in C# are essentially a description of how to describe different types of objects in your code. Now over here in Visual Studio, I created a new WinForms application and I called it Lesson 13. And I actually added some new controls here or new input types. A couple of things that I actually put in here, for instance, was this is a combo box. And so essentially, basically what I can do is I can add a series of or a list of drop-down items, or I can type in a text field here if I want to. And the reason why we've done that is because we're going to have different instances or types of cars, and then we're going to display different properties about those instances of cars when we press this button load. And it looks like I actually need to change the name here to button load and change the text for this button to just say load. So when I have the individual text boxes here, I have text color. So you can see here that there's text underscore color for this text box. We have text underscore doors, text underscore engine, and then we have text underscore wheels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a C# class object that is going to have those 4 different properties associated with that car. Now, when I press the load button and I've selected a certain car in the drop-down list, it's going to load up the properties associated with that car name. Now, what I've done here is on the left-hand side in my controls for this combo box, essentially that is this control right here. And then I also, what I did is I'm using a picture box here for this picture of the car. So this is optional, but just so you can see that, you essentially have a picture box, and then you can place that here. You can resize the picture itself, and then what you do is there's a little button here at the upper right-hand corner of that particular control or that input, and you can press that button and then say choose image. And then what I did is I just downloaded an image of the car from the internet here, and I can just browse to any PNG or JPEG or bitmap file. And then what you can do is you can tell it to basically, once you selected that and say import, what you can do is you can stretch the image. So let me actually do that. So I'll just grab that. So I'm going to do local resource, and then I'm going to press the import button and browse to the saved car file, picture file on my computer. And then what I'll do is I'll just switch this to zoom. And then what it'll do is it'll actually zoom in on the image, and as I resize the picture box, it resizes essentially the car. So you can do something pretty much like this. So go ahead and pause the video and get your application and your user interface here on your form all caught up with this. All right, so to get started, we're going to actually create a new C# file which will contain this car class that we're going to work with. So at the upper right hand corner, there is the Solution Explorer, and there's the solution at the top, then there's the project that is inside of that solution, which is basically our Windows Form application. We're going to right click on that, and we're going to go to the Add option here, and then we're going to say New Item. So I'll just keep that there for a second so you can see that. So right click on the project, Add New Item. Now when we do that, it's going to open up a dialog box where we can add a variety of different things. Now by default, we're going to just add a new class or C# file here. So we're going to pick this option here at the top. Now at the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to change the name from class 1, and we're just going to simply call this car. So it'll create a new car C# file and define a basic car class. So here in the Solution Explorer, now you'll see that there is the car.cs file. If we actually open up by right-clicking and saying Open Up Folder in File Explorer, this is actually the folder browser here, and you'll see that there's the car.cs or C# file. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and change a few things in here. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually just declare this as public. And so without getting too deep into explaining this, public basically makes sure and ensures that essentially this class will be able to be seen throughout our code. So if we have other C# files or throughout our application here, we're going to be able to use and create car objects in our code. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we actually need to define some properties here that allow us to store information about the car. So going back to our form, we had 4 different properties. We had the color of the car, the number of doors, the engine type, and then the number of wheels. So I'm going to go ahead and say public, and I'll do string, and I'm going to say color. Then I'm going to say public, then I'm going to say string, and we will say engine. Public int for integer for the number of wheels. Public int for the number of doors. Okay, so again, why am I using the word public at the beginning of these variable declarations? Well, the reason is because I want these properties to be able to be set by the programmer whenever they create new instances of this car class. And if I didn't have that there, then basically they wouldn't be able to get access to that particular property or see that. And so there is intention sometimes where you want to create some internal fields or properties and variables that are only used internally by your class and certain functions and methods in your class. But in this particular case, we want all of these publicly exposed so that way the programmer can change the color, change the engine type, etc., etc. All right, now the next key thing we need to do is we actually need to create a constructor. And so we're also going to use public here, and we're going to say car, and then we're going to put parentheses, and then we will create another set of curly brackets. So the whole idea here is that whenever you create a new instance of a car class, like let's say we have 5 different cars we're going to create. Whenever we create a new instance here, this is going to be a constructor where we're going to set some of the default values for a new car when it gets created. So we're just going to say color is going to equal red. And then we'll say engine equals V6. And then basically we can do number of wheels equals 4. And we'll say number of doors. Let's just say the default sedan is 4 doors here. Okay, so whenever a new car is created, these properties here are going to be set by default, and then we can change those or modify those as required. Now, you can also do a multiple constructors. So watch this. I can say public, and then I can say car, and then I can actually specify and pass these values whenever I create a new instance. So I'm going to go ahead and just say string data type and say color of car. Then I'll just say string engine type. Then I'll say let's see, integer num wheels, so number of wheels, and then int num of doors. Okay, so essentially, I'm still going to do curly brackets. Now, the difference between these two is instead of basically these defaults being there, I'm actually going to pass these parameters in the constructor inside the parentheses, and I'm going to set these internal fields or properties here, or these variables inside the class, to be based on whatever the user or the programmer sets. So I'm going to just go ahead and pass these parameters that are in the constructor here, and I'll just pass that to these internal properties. Okay, there we go. All right, so we now essentially have the fundamentals of our class. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go back to our main form itself, and I'm just going to go ahead and go into the form load event. So I'm just going to double click on the background of the form, and it opens up a code block here for when the form is actually loaded. Now, at the very top, I'm going to create a new list. And guess what? In previous examples, we put things like string or integer and basically, very core object types. Well, now we can put anything in a list. We can put cars in a list. So now that we have this new car class that we've created, we're going to just say car list. Then when the form actually loads, what we can do is we can say car list, and then we can say equals new car list. And so here we go. Check this out. This is actually a constructor. See here, we're instantiating a new object called list of cars, and then we have the parentheses. Now watch this. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually create a new car object. So I'm going to say car is the data type, because that's the class that we just created. And I'm going to just say new car, or we could even call this car1, and say equals new, and then see here there's car. And check it out, there are the two constructors. There's the empty or blank constructor, which will just set default properties, or as I'm constructing this new instance of car number 1, I can specify the color right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is red. Then I'm going to go ahead and say the engine type is going to be V8. Then I will say the number of wheels is 4, and the number of doors is 2. So maybe we have a sports car here. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make a few instances of these cars. So let me actually just copy this code. So let's say that there's going to be 4 cars. So we'll say 2, 3, 4. All right, so I'm going to change this to blue. Maybe we'll set this to white. And maybe we'll set this to gray. And then maybe we'll just change, change the engine type on a couple of these. So let's make a couple of these V6s. And, although it's not very common to change the number of wheels, well, in fact, we'll probably leave that all the same here. Let's actually just change the number of doors. So we'll change a couple of the cars here to 4 doors. And then basically we now have 4 separate instances of cars. Okay, so in the actual car class file itself, the C# file, this is actually defining the recipe of a car, right? So we have this car object that we're creating, and we're saying that all cars have these 4 basic fundamental properties. The values of those properties can change, but essentially every car is going to have these 4 things on it. Now, what I've done here on my actual code is I've said, all right, I'm going to create a new collection or a new list of cars. And if you think about like basically a car lot for a car dealership, they have a parking lot and they have a whole bunch of different instances of cars on their parking lot. Well, the parking lot is kind of like a list. So I basically have a collection of cars here. And what I'm going to do is I've instantiated all 4 of these cars. They have different property values. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add all of these cars basically to this list. Now to do that, there's a couple different ways. In the previous code examples, I actually showcased here where I can come in and I can say carlist.add, and then I can put car1 there. So that's one way that I can do this. And then I can just repeat that for each of these. Now I'm going to go ahead and comment this code out, and I'm going to show you an easier way to create a new list and have some default values in it. So I'm going to just paste that code here. So here I can just say new car list, and then what I can do is in curly brackets, I can actually create a few different instances of new car objects and add those to that list at the same time that I'm actually defining that new list for this car list basically here. So this is a couple different ways that you can do it. You can call the add method, or you can actually just add those objects all in one, basically command as you instantiate that new list. All right, so now that we've got essentially 4 cars added here, the other thing that I need to do is I actually want to get these cars over into the user interface here for this dropdown of cars. So it looks like we actually need to kind of make a name for the different types of cars. So let's just call, let's actually go back into our car code, and we need to create a new property here. So I'm just going to say public, and we'll say string, and we'll just say name of car. So we can just call it name. All right, so let's just say the default name is going to be blue. No, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of something. Think of your favorite car here. Let's just say El Camino. All right, just as an example. And so what we'll do is we'll say that that's the default name. And then here we can also add another property, and we'll just say name of car. And so why am I actually naming these a little bit different? These cannot be the same name as the internal properties. So that's why I'm just kind of making these names for this constructor a little bit different. But here I'm now going to create name equals name of car. And what happens is when we change this fundamental underlying code of the class, you'll see here that we actually need to update this code here because I don't have enough arguments being passed. So watch this. We're actually going to call this car1 just to keep this simple and not get anybody upset that I am not picking their favorite car. Let's do car2. And then we will say car3. And we will finish up with a car4. There we go. All right, so now let's build and make sure that there's no compile errors. So everything is good. I'm actually going to get rid of this other code here since we don't really need that anymore. And now we have the 4 different cars. Now let's just practice some of the other things that we learned in our previous exercises. We're going to go ahead and do a for each loop. And I'm just going to say for each car object, and we'll just say, this car, or we can use the default value that it shows us there, but let's just say this car in the car list. So as we go through each car, what we're going to do is on the basically the combo box. So I created a combo box here. And here's a good example of why I've been teaching you to give names to your controls on your form, because otherwise now I have this generic combo box 1. And I'm like, what the heck is that? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go to combo box 1 items dot add, and I'm going to say this car dot name. So basically I'm adding the name of all of the cars that are in this list to the drop-down list of this combo box that is on my form. So let's go back to my form here. I can see that this is called combo box 1. I need to go ahead and change the name of that. We're just going to call this combo underscore car names. Now when I change it here inside of the form editor and the properties, if I go back to my code, you'll see that that control has changed here in the code to match that as well. So it's combo car names.items add. So I'm basically going through each car, I'm adding that, and then here we go. All right. If I actually look at this, I'm noticing already that I've created this as a list, and I probably wanted to create this as a dictionary so I can quickly get to the specific car and properties that I want to. But I'll show you that here in a second. So the next thing that we basically want to do is we want to go back to our code here, and there's this load button. So when the user selects a car in the drop-down list and then they press load, we want those properties for that specific car name to actually appear here in the dialog box. So I'm just going to double click on this load. And what I'm going to do is, because we actually set the car list as a class level variable, so we can actually get to that car list whenever we want, whenever we do different things in our code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, use this for each loop here. And instead of adding the combo boxes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say, let's actually get rid of that code. And I'm going to go ahead and first get whatever the user selected from the combo car names. So if I go to combo car names.text field, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get that. And I'm going to say string selected car on the user interface. Okay, so that's what the user has selected. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and loop through each of the cars in the car list, and I'm going to do a conditional statement. If basically this car dot name is equal to the selected car on UI.text, right? Or basically we already got that. So the string value or the name of the car that's basically been selected on the dialog box. If that's true, then I'm going to go ahead and display this car's properties. All right, so now we have text underscore color is going to equal this car dot color. So there's the property of the color of this car. Then I'm going to go ahead and say text underscore doors dot text equals this car dot doors, or number of doors. All right, so I'm getting a couple of errors here in Visual Studio, and on this one I forgot to put the text property because we're actually getting, or sorry, we're setting the text field of this text color text box here. All right, so there's text color, so we're setting the text property here to be whatever we have inside of our class. All right, so we have, sorry, going back to form 1. So we have this car.color is going to be the text color text box. We're going to set that value. Now on the text doors.text, notice that there's an error here because we have an integer in our class, but we need to turn that into a string. So we'll say toString. Then we'll say text underscore engine dot text equals this car dot engine. Then we'll say text underscore wheels dot text equals this car dot wheels, number of wheels dot toString, because we need to convert that integer to essentially a string. Okay, so if you want to pause the code here and kind of take a look at what we've done, we're actually using a variety of different things that we've learned in the previous training videos, right? Like we're declaring a new string data type. We're getting the text value from basically the user interface. We're doing a for each loop, and we're looping through each of the car objects that are in the car list. And then what we're doing is we're doing a conditional statement that says if the car name basically of this particular car that we're looping on, if the name equals the same name as what the user selected on the user interface, then let's go ahead and show all of those properties on the user interface. Let's see if this code actually works. So I'm going to press play. In the dropdown, we can see that there are 4 different cars in the dropdown list. And so when we added the cars basically to the items, basically here, this items is essentially whatever is going to appear in the drop-down list as options. So I'm going to choose car 2. I'll then press load, and you'll see here the color, the number of basically doors, the number of wheels, and the engine type have now all been displayed. Let's go to car 4. We'll press load, and we can see that the color, the number of doors, the number of wheels, and the engine type have all been displayed. So this is an actually really great example of an application that you might develop. You have this product and you want to show information about that. And then you basically have different types of cars or different types of things that are objects that you want to show information about. You load that, and then you show those properties of that specific object. Okay, so I didn't like how I implemented the code before, where I actually had a list of cars and then I had to do a loop through each of the cars to find the name of the car in the list that matched what was selected on the user interface. So now I made a dictionary, and this is a perfect example of where a dictionary is very handy. Rather than iterating through every car, I'm actually going to store a lookup or a dictionary here where I can pass the name of the car and it will then return to me that specific car object rather than having to iterate or loop through every one of the cars in the list. So I changed this from list car to dictionary string car. So the key value is going to be a string or the name of the car, and then the instance of the car and all of the properties about that. All right, so then when I came down here in the form load event, I just changed the constructor on this, basically this new car dictionary that's being created, and I added the key name here at the beginning, and then I added a new car object or a new instance of a car for each of those particular car names. So then I also went through basically each of the car names in the car dictionary key values, right? So all the keys are going to be strings. And so then I just added those to the combo box car name items list. And then down in the actual button load event, rather than doing a for loop, I'm still getting the selected car name from the combo box that the user selected on the dialog box. But now I'm just checking to see that the car dictionary contains a key or a car name that matches what's been chosen in the user interface. If it has, I'm now going to go get that car from the car dictionary by simply passing that car name. So when we look at the IntelliSense here, if I actually just come into this, you'll see that essentially I'm passing the string of the key or the car name, and then it's going to return a car object to me, which is this car. And then I can just get the properties. So performance-wise, this is just a little bit faster and just a tighter code and cleaner code rather than iterating through every car object inside of a list. All right, so let's just go ahead and run this code and double check and make sure that everything still works the same. So I still have my cars. I'm going to go ahead and select car 3 and I'll load. And now the dictionary is basically just looking at that key name for car 3 and it's finding that car and displaying all of those properties.